Good afternoon. It's really great to see so many of you here. My name is Dr. Denise Dewhurst. I'm a professor of psychology and department chair for anthropology, economics, education, philosophy, and psychology here at the Germantown campus. This afternoon, it is my great pleasure, and I know everybody says that, but really is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Bruce Madariaga. Many of you already know Professor Madariaga's story, but always I think it's worth repeating. Professor Madariaga never went to high school. He had dropped out after junior high, bored, disinterested, and unmotivated. To use his words, a community college in Delaware saved him. He went on to earn 4 college degrees, the last of which is from Harvard University. His first career was as a senior economist for the United States federal government. Luckily for us, he always had this idea of a second career. And his second career was that he wanted to go back and become a community college professor. He started teaching for us part-time, and in 2001, we were fortunate enough to have him join our full-time faculty. In the time since, he has more than doubled the size of our economics program here at the Germantown campus. He has helped strengthen the discipline of economics college-wide. He's written a book, Economics for Life, which is in its 3rd or 4th printing. It is a standard adoption in classrooms, high school level, community college level, 4-year university level, all over the United States, and also in Canada. Currently, he is a National Science Foundation economics teaching facilitator. What does that mean? It means in that role, he goes all over the country helping people learn how to do a better job teaching economics, making it understandable. It's such an important discipline in today's world for us to really get. It won't surprise you when I tell you that earlier this year, he received a Montgomery College Outstanding Faculty Award. I think now you understand why I feel so privileged to have him as a colleague and very lucky to have him as a friend. Professor Bruce Madariaga.
Thank you very much, Denise. Welcome, and thank you all for coming. I have some important facts about our world to share with you today, but I have to warn you, they're not all happy facts. Before I get to these facts, I'd like to ask you to open your imaginations. Imagine for me 2 worlds. I'll call the first world the fisherman's world. In the fisherman's world, people make a living catching fish and selling the fish. Some fishermen are more successful than others, primarily because they stay out there, they work harder, and they catch more fish. But in the fisherman's world, maybe the most successful fisherman catches twice as much fish as the least successful fisherman. He makes twice as much money. Now imagine for me world number 2. World number 2 I'll call the gold prospector's world. In the gold prospector's world, people make a living by finding gold. And those that stay out there longer have a higher chance of finding gold. But the primary determinant of success in the gold prospector's world is luck. Some people find gold and become very wealthy. But most, they search and search, find little, and struggle. So I have 2 questions for you. 2 questions for you to ponder over the next 40 minutes. First question is, which world do you think is more like our world? The second question is, which world, fisherman's world, gold prospector's world, which world would you prefer to live in? So you think about that, and I'll share with you some facts about our world. First, some good news. New world record. We now have thousands of billionaires. That's a good thing. It's good that people succeed at such high levels. Now, we all hear these words millions and billions and trillions, and it's hard to put such huge numbers in perspective. Let me take a shot. Based on my back-of-the-envelope calculations, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, their net wealth is over $70 billion each. So Bill could come to Montgomery County, and he could start buying houses. By my calculations, he could buy a house every hour for the next 20 years and still have money left over. He would have bought about half the houses in Montgomery County. $1 billion is a big number. That's a good thing. It's good that people can succeed at such levels. Now, let me share another fact about our world. How can this be in a world with thousands of billionaires? Now, I ask my students, I say, well, why don't we see this every day in the news? Isn't it of the utmost importance? And they pick up on it right away. They say to me, Professor M, that's not even news. It happens every day. Yeah, they're right about that. It's kind of like, if a plane crashes, we hear about it. And we have auto accidents every single day. Many more people die from auto accidents, but we don't hear about that. It's not news. Then my students say, Professor M, that doesn't happen here. It happens far away. And people don't care as much if it happens far away. And I think they're right about that too. But I never quite understood why. Why should we care about somebody more because of where they live? Should we care more about somebody who lives on this side of the Mexican-Texas border versus somebody on this side? Does it really make sense? If you live in Germantown, do you care more about Germantownians than Gaithersburgians? Doesn't follow. But they're not done. My students say, Professor M, they say, that's a bummer. That's depressing. That's not going to sell on the news. And I think they're right about that, too. So obviously, we have wide inequality in our world. But inequality in and of itself isn't necessarily unjust or bad. For example, consider these three worlds. World number one we could call the socialist economy world, right? Where everybody makes same income level. World number two we could call the successful capitalist world, where there's inequality, but even the worst off earns more money than in the socialist world. Which world is more just? Well, there's no scientific answer to what's just and what's unjust. Philosophers have been wrestling with that for forever. One philosopher, John Rawls, he used the following test. He said, suppose that we were all under a veil of ignorance. That we didn't know whether we'd be a lucky winner or unlucky loser if we entered world number 2. Given that, which world would people enter into? World number 1 or world number 2? Not knowing if you're going to be a winner or loser in world number 2. I'd be willing to guess that the vast majority of you would enter world number 2, even though there's higher inequality in world number 2. Be that the case, using Professor Rawls' criteria, world number 2 would be more just than world number 1, even though it has more inequality. Consider world number 3. Let's compare world number 1 with world number 3. World number 3, there's even greater inequality. And there may be greater poverty also. But under a veil of ignorance, not knowing whether you'd be a lucky winner or unlucky loser in world number 3, some of you may still choose, maybe not all of you, but some of you may still choose to enter world number 3 versus world number 1. Therefore, we cannot conclude that inequality or even poverty is necessarily unjust. But what about the level of inequality and poverty that exists in our world today? That's what I want to explore with you. Let's first start with America. Income and wealth inequality in America. Okay? New American record. Now, the highest income 1% earns almost 20% of all income in the United States. That's a new record. Income inequality has been steadily increasing in America over the last 4 decades. Income inequality is one thing, wealth inequality is something else. You know the difference? Income is what you earn in a year. Wealth is the value of all of your assets. Wealth inequality may be a better measure of inequality. And the story with wealth inequality is much more shocking. What I'd like to show you is a visualization of the results of a serious academic study.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now, let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
The wealthiest 400 Americans have as much wealth as the least wealthy 150 million Americans. Fisherman's world, gold prospector's world. The message from this video is clear. Wealth inequality is way higher than people think it is in America. It's way, way, way higher than people want it to be in America. And it's getting worse. But everyone can be wealthy in America, right? This is the land of opportunity. All it takes is hard work, applying one's talents, and we can all be wealthy. Well, it's not that simple. there have been various studies of economic mobility in the United States, and they all pretty much say similar things. This summary from a Brookings Institute, very top-notch think tank, is that a child's economic prospects are very much tied to the economic status of their parents. The chances of a child born into a wealthy family of making it into the top 5% income bracket is 22%. A child born in poverty, the chances are just 1%. Fisherman's world, gold prospector's world. Well, that's a picture of inequality in America. Let's turn our attention a little bit to poverty and inequality globally. There's about 7 billion people on our planet today. Still, about 2.4 billion, that's about a third of the world's population, live on $2 or less of material goods and services. It's hard to imagine. This stat blows my mind. The wealthiest 3 individuals have as much wealth as the poorest 600 million. Fisherman's world, gold prospector's world. Let's see where wealth and poverty exist in our world. This map is a map of GDP per capita. That's essentially income per person. Okay? So the dark blue areas, no surprises here, are the wealthy countries of the world: North America, Northern Western Europe, Australia, Japan, some oil-rich Middle Eastern countries. Least wealthy are the red areas, mostly Africa, some in Asia. Now, we all know that poverty reduces quality of life. I want to show you how poverty not just reduces quality of life, but life itself, longevity of life. The next slide is life expectancy worldwide. Countries in the green, dark green, have the longest life expectancies. Notice the US is not in the top category. Countries in the red, especially the dark red, have the shortest life expectancies. Note that more than half of the countries in Africa have life expectancy still today of under 50 years. Now, just to kind of visually show you the relationship between income and life expectancy, let me just kind of flip these back and forth a little bit. Pretty high correlation. Not perfectly correlated, but pretty clear that those countries with low income also have the lowest life expectancies. Poverty matters, and matters a lot. The quality of life and to life itself. Independent of poverty, inequality can matter too. In the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of research on the topic of happiness. What makes people happy? In the psychology literature and economics literature. One of the focuses of this literature is the relationship between income and wealth and happiness. Does money buy happiness? Well, the jury's still out a bit on this literature, but the literature strongly suggests that money can buy happiness, at least until people get their basic needs met. Money's very good at buying the things to get people's basic needs met. But beyond that amount, additional money seems to generate very little extra happiness. There seems to be diminishing returns to money in producing happiness. Well, that has some profound public policy consequences. It means that we shouldn't necessarily be trying to maximize wealth, because we really want to maximize happiness, and they're not the same thing. So, a utilitarian holds the moral framework that what is best, what act is best, or what policy is best, is the one that creates the most happiness. A utilitarian would judge then that policies that would, in effect, redistribute from the wealthy to the poor would be just because it would increase overall well-being, assuming that incentives are not to work are not destroyed. So inequality matters even beyond poverty to people's well-being. Okay, so at this point, I'm willing to bet that at least some of you believe that our world is more like a gold prospector's world than a fisherman's world. And I'm willing to bet that some of you who believe the world is more like a gold prospector's world would prefer the world to be more like a fisherman's world. Be that the case, the next question would be, how do we make that happen? What can be done? Well, what could public policy and governments do? Well, the first thing they can do is make matters worse, especially corrupt governments. And of course, corruption is rampant around the world. Many of the most poorest countries in the world are poor because they're led by dictators more interested in maintaining power than helping their people. Even more widespread is bureaucratic corruption. In many places of the world, it's very hard to start a business because one has to bribe government officials to get the necessary permits and licenses. It can take many, many, many months and cost a lot of money. As a consequence, businesses don't get started. Here in the US, the level of corruption is not as great, but we have our own forms of corruption. Wealthy individuals, corporations, can use their wealth within the political system to get added influence and, very possibly, to become more wealthy. We're not going to fix this problem without some serious campaign finance reform. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Even well-meaning governments and government policy can at times do more harm than good. There are many examples of this. One example is when governments try to keep prices low in order to allow low-income people to be able to purchase products, like price caps on gasoline or rent or medicines. Sounds good, but we have to think past the initial effects of such policies. Inevitably, they lead to shortages and do more harm than good. Even minimum wage laws, policy that's very popular in this country, and I bet in this room as well, have important adverse unintended consequences. Some of you may have heard that Montgomery County Council has just proposed increasing the minimum wage from its current federal level, $7.25, up to $11.50 an hour. Clearly, well-meaning. PG County is planning the same thing. Good idea? Well, maybe, but one has to consider the unintended consequences. Businesses will adjust to this. They may hire less workers. They may get technologies to replace workers. They may hire $12 an hour, couple $12 an hour workers to replace 3 $8 an hour workers. They may cut worker benefits. They may close down. They may move to Virginia. So it could cause unemployment of the people you're trying to help, or maybe they'll raise prices, which may mean higher prices for low-income consumers. And even considering all that, does the minimum wage target poverty very well? Some people that get the minimum wage are teenagers that looking for job experience, and they may live in middle-class families. So we have to be wise. One policy that economists often recommend to help low-income workers is expanding the earned income tax credit. That's a subsidy for low-income workers. It targets poverty better, it's based on income, and it actually has been shown to promote more employment, not less. So we have to think things through. But we can't strangle capitalism and our market system. Capitalism is a great wealth generator. Just has this side effect of inequality. Consider some of the successes. Here in America, today, we have 10 times the value of goods and services to each person today than the average person had 110 years ago in this country. So it has worked for us. Consider China. 30 years ago, the extreme poverty rate in China was 85%. Just 30 years ago. Today, it's under 15%. This is the greatest economic miracle this planet has ever seen in a 30-year period. Part of the reason why it occurred is because of movement towards capitalism, where they converted communal land to private property, expanded international trade, made some other reforms. They brought 600 million people out of extreme poverty. That's twice the number of people who live in this country. So we don't want to strangle capitalism. By the way, inequality is on the rise in China today. So are there public policies we can use in America to reduce inequality without getting too much in the way of work incentives and our market system? Yeah, there are many, and I don't have time to get into a lot of them. I just want to mention a couple. Certainly, investments that help people, provide opportunities for people, to help them help themselves, which would help them and help the community as well, are warranted. Investments in education are certainly fall into that category. There are others. We can use our tax system to promote a more equitable America without destroying work incentives. There are ways. Consider capital gains tax. Some of you may have heard Warren Buffett. He used to go around all the time saying, my tax rate is lower than my secretary's. And it was, probably still is. How can that be? Well, it's because his secretary, just like you and I, we pay our income taxes based on our salaries, wages and salaries. Warren Buffett doesn't make any salary. He gets all of his income based on investments, and he pays the capital gains tax, which is lower than the income tax rates that we pay. Does that promote equity? Is that just? Consider the estate tax. Congress, over the last 15 years, has been phasing out the estate tax. Today, you can inherit from your parents solely because you were born to a wealthy family, $5.25 million entirely tax-free. Does that promote equality? Does that promote justice? Does it promote work effort? If somebody dropped $5.25 million on you, would that make you want to work more? Or maybe retire earlier? So there are things we can do from a public policy perspective to reduce inequality and make our country more just. And there are things we can do as individuals also. We can be active. Certainly we can be active. Challenge for you, students out there, challenge for you. How about a club? How about an inequality and justice club? Band together. Figure out what you can do to make a difference. And we can give. But we do need to give wisely. Let me share with you a couple principles of smart giving. Principle 1, be sure to give in the way you can give best, or using economics language, according to your comparative advantage. If you have a lot of money, give money. Wouldn't make sense for Bill Gates to be handing out soup at the soup kitchen, right? His time is too valuable. He should spend his time making money and then giving that away if he wants to do the most good. If you have some free time and don't have any money, give your time. If you're like me today and you have a microphone, give your voice. Principle 2, give to those who need it most. You'll probably do the most good if you give to the neediest. And remember, the neediest are probably not your neighbors. They're probably in one of those red countries we showed a little bit ago. Principle 3, give in a way that provides benefits not just to the recipient, but to others as well. Give in a way that promotes positive spillovers to other people. For example, giving to promote a vaccination program that would stop the spread of an infectious disease. That would be a really wise way to give. You'd help the person vaccinated and many others at the same time. Other giving can do that too. Giving for education, for small business loans, can help whole communities. Now, I don't pretend to know the best way for you or for me to give. But let me leave you today with one example of what I think is a smart way to give, if what your goal is to do as much good with as little money as possible. Here's one example. Yes, a child dies every minute in Africa from malaria. It only costs $10 to manufacture and distribute a bed net that can protect 3 children from the risk of catching malaria. There's a website right there. It takes 2 minutes to go to it. This has been shown to be one of the most cost-effective ways to save a life. For every 230 bed nets that are purchased, 3 children are prevented from getting malaria, and 1 child's life is saved. So, it takes $2,300 to save a life and save 2 other children from getting malaria. That means we can go on that European vacation for a week, or we can save a child's life and 2 others from catching malaria. I don't want to give you a guilt trip, but these are the kinds of choices that face us. In any case, in your own ways, we all can make positive differences. And research backs me up on this. If you do what you can to make a positive difference, you'll make yourself happier too. So let's do what we can do. Thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.